Hello and welcome to another ReadyForTheWorst.com Google Hangout. I'm your host, Sarah Stafford. Today we're going to be talking with federal firearms licensee Janet Swahn of bestgunbroker.com about home self-defense firearms for women.
This is Sarah Stafford from ReadyForTheWorst.com, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Janet Swahn from bestgunbroker.com, and we're going to talk today about home defense firearms for women. So welcome, Janet.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
It's wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Now, you are a firearms broker, and tell me just generally, are women buying more home defense firearms these days than they used to?
Absolutely. The market for firearms has grown so largely since Obama has been elected. I think he's been the #1 firearms retailer for us. And women are starting to understand that we need to empower ourselves and be prepared with our own firearms. And manufacturers, fortunately, are realizing this too, so they're developing a lot of weapons that are really good for a female shooter.
You know, it's funny. I used to go to the SHOT Show every year, and the last time I was there, which was, I guess it was 2012, I noticed that there were quite a few rifles with pink stocks. What do you think about this whole trend toward making guns for girls pink? I think it's kind of weird myself. What's your take on that?
I personally think it's great. I mean, if the firearm works and you feel comfortable carrying something that's a little more stylish. I have a pink and a purple, and I have a pink AR-15, so I go out to the range, and the guys absolutely love it. And they actually think that it will help them to encourage their wives or girlfriends who are sometimes anti-gun. Oh, if my wife sees this or my girlfriend sees this, I think I can get her out here. And I think that's a positive.
Oh, it's definitely a positive. I just think it's kind of funny that you know, the gun has to be pink. You know, it's just hilarious.
Cute.
Well, it is cute. I mean, what's next? Hello Kitty AR-15? I don't know.
As long as it operates properly. Certainly for carry concealment, I recommend a black only because it conceals better. But for home defense, if you like it pink, go for it.
Great. So what are some things that women should take into consideration when they're choosing a home defense weapon?
Well, Sarah, I know from experience that one sure way to liven up a day at the range is to ask a group of shooters what they think is the best weapon for home defense. And I'm sure you've gotten a lot of answers as well.
Oh, yeah.
For years the argument was divided into just two camps. There's the pistol crowd, and then there's the shotgun crowd. Now there's a third school of thought, which is the shooters who like the AR-15 rifle. Bottom line is, when someone breaks into your home, it must be go time all the time. There's no room for hesitation because your life and the welfare of your families, you know, it's in your hands. I think the most important issue, if we're choosing three, would be reliability. You need a gun that will work and that will likely keep working when you need it most. That includes the mechanical functioning of the gun and the practical ability for the shooter to be able to rely on the gun to run properly in an emergency, in a stressful situation. Next, I would say, is shootability. That means basically the ability to use the firearm across all plausible circumstances that you could be faced with. In regard to a defense firearm, the most important aspect, I think, in shootability would be the fit of the gun to your hand. If you think about when you're firing, the less optimal the fit, it's usually not as intuitive to shoot, and unless you're using great concentration. And obviously, in a situation where you're stressed out, you need something that is very intuitive. You grab it and it fits. So I think that is extremely important. Finally, I think you need to be able to control what you have in your hand. Manufacturers, as I said before, are really paying attention to the trend of female gun owners, and they're making weapons that are poly finishes, so they're lighter, and they feel better in our hands. So my feel on it, if a gal feels comfortable with a .22, then go with it until you feel comfortable with a higher caliber. You know, bottom line, you need to be comfortable with what's in your hand, and that's the bottom line. So reliability, shootability, and comfort in what you're shooting, that you know are comfortable with its power. And I can show you some weapons as we go along that I have for home defense that I feel cover all of those three important aspects.
And those are all really important. I mean, personally, I have really small hands because I'm a small woman. And, you know, these guns with the double stack magazines, like the big Glocks, they just started a few years ago making them with single stack magazines. I really wasn't comfortable shooting the double stack magazines because it was kind of digging into the webbing between my thumb and my index finger, the butt of the gun. And, you know, I really prefer a 45 with you know, like the beaver tail type of grip. Those are really good, I think, for home defense because of the larger caliber. And again, like you said, I like them because they fit into my hand, and that's so important when you're trying to you know, control the weapon in a stressful situation. Your fine motor skills are the first things to go. So it's one of those things where you need it to be, like some people say, a point and click interface.
Yes, I agree with that completely. I have a Smith & Wesson hammerless double action revolver, and it's a caliber 38. And these hold 5 shots, but they have no safety to fumble with. When you're half asleep, you just grip it, aim, and squeeze the trigger. Let me show you. I've obviously unloaded all of these, but this is a little Smith & Wesson. It's unloaded.
Okay, good.
Hammerless. Great little weapon. It's light in my hand, as you can see, fits nicely. So to me, if you're half asleep and all of a sudden there's an intruder in your home, your adrenaline pumps, your heart rate goes up, you need to be in automatic mode, and to me it's very easy to grab, grip, aim, and squeeze a trigger. And when you're fumbling, like you said, with, you know, if you do have a jam, I mean, it can be very frightening and you may panic. Hopefully you've had enough training that you wouldn't do that, but for me, that's my first go-to.
Yeah.
Is that 38. And then I have other ones, you know, if I need backups, but hopefully, hopefully I won't need to be grabbing multiple weapons. If so, I have some real grief at that point.
So is the type of firearm that we choose, is that different depending on whether my home is rural or urban?
That's really a great question. First, you must know the laws regulating firearm ownership in your jurisdiction, because depending on where you live, that can vary, and you need to know what the law states that you can own. But let's think clearly.
Yeah.
In most cases, the attacker is already in or near your home at close range. So with that being said, the basic answer is no. Now, choosing a firearm for home or property defense in a rural area is somewhat different from that when you're buying or living in a city. Basically, the calibers used will be the same, but the home that's in a rural area, you probably will find weapons that are for short and long range threats. But as far as the home defense situation, if you sort of break it down and say, wait a minute, they're already in my home, yes, we would be using similar defense weapons. And again, you need to check with your state and local jurisdictions to find out what they allow in your area, because each state is different, of course.
Yeah. So are there things that I need to consider if I'm an apartment dweller and don't have, so if I'm sharing walls with a neighbor, are there things that I need to take into consideration when choosing a weapon and ammunition that I wouldn't probably need to consider if I weren't sharing walls?
Yes, definitely. One of the most important factors to consider is bullet penetration, which is what you're talking about. But I think the majority of homes built in America have drywall, and many of them have hollow doors. So basically, the bullet penetration would go across all homes as well. But in an apartment, one of the rules of firearm safety, as you know, is be aware of your target and what's beyond it.
That once beyond thing is really important.
Absolutely. You're in a situation where you're being attacked. The last thing you're thinking is, what's beyond this person who is getting ready to put their hands around my neck and do who knows what. So in general, rifles penetrate more than handguns, and handguns penetrate more than shotguns. So unlike the pistol, shotguns fire, many small projectiles at the target. So these projectiles are simple metal balls, and rather than the more aerodynamic, rifle or handgun bullet. So because of these characteristics, shotguns generally have over penetration less than handguns, even though they have a long barrel. So does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And I've even heard some home defense experts recommend, if you're living in a more populated area, that you use birdshot in the shotgun instead of buckshot, because the birdshot is smaller and it's less likely to penetrate through the drywall and go off and hurt somebody else that you didn't want to hurt.
Absolutely. And just taking and getting the shotgun ready might have the intruder run out.
Yeah, that sound of the racking of the slide, I think every home intruder knows what that sounds like, and know that it's probably wise to beat a hasty retreat when you hear that sound.
Amen.
So what kind of ammunition is best for home defense purposes, just generally?
Well, for handguns, I would say the hollow point ammo is better. It has better knockdown power, which is what we want to do, than the full metal jacket or round nose. But despite of what you see on TV, if you watch TV, the majority of people, I think like 80%, that are shot with handguns, they survive.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Everybody thinks that, people don't survive handgun wounds, but they do very often. Yes.
Well, handguns are weak compared to rifles and shotguns, but of course you want to have every chance you can create for yourself. So I would say for that, use the hollow point for home defense. For rifles, the fast expanding bullets are the best choice. I think hollow point and plastic tipped bullets both expand rapidly. And then we talked about the shotgun. You can use the buckshot or the bird. It's really a matter of where you live. But I would say the buckshot if you're living in a home.
Okay. So if I have kids, what's the best way for me to make sure that they don't find my gun and misuse it? Because, we're really aware of this whole firearm safety thing with the kids in the home. So what can we do to make the weapon, on the one hand, accessible when we need it, but not accessible to kids who shouldn't have access to it?
Well, that obviously is a very important question, and a lot of homes do not properly protect themselves because of that reason. The number one basically the number of privately owned guns in the U.S. I think is at an all-time high. It's upwards of 300 million, and it rises by about 10 million a year. And I think I've read that since 1930, the annual number of firearm accident deaths has actually decreased by 81%.
Yeah.
So the U.S. population more than doubled, and the number of firearms has quintupled. And among children, such deaths has decreased something like 89% since 1975. Today, Sarah, the odds of a child dying in a firearm accident is something like 1 in a million.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't really happen that often. It's just that whenever it does happen, of course, the media, since they all hate guns, they want to play it up and act like it's this everyday thing. But, really it's not. And most of the children, quote unquote children, that are dying in firearms accidents are actually teenagers who are involved in, drug deals and gangs. They're not really children. I mean, I guess legally speaking, they're under 18, but they're actually involved in crime. So I wouldn't classify them as, mere innocent children, bystanders who are killed with guns. Yes, they're children, legally speaking, because they're under 18. Yes, they are being killed with guns, but it's because they're involved in criminal activities. And so, that's where that statistic comes from. And, of course, the media just loves to tout that. And while I will agree that whenever a child gets killed with a gun, it's a tragedy, but it's no worse of a tragedy than if they were killed by, a car or anything else. I mean, they're still dead, right? But, the media uses that to make it seem like guns are much more dangerous than they are, when in fact, probably the most risky thing that a child does every day is get into a car with mom and dad and drive around. That, statistically speaking, is much more dangerous than having a firearm in the home.
Well, or getting on a school bus without seatbelts with the driver texting.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding, responsible citizens, and this is clearly shown in the very facts that I just stated. The bottom line is that education decreases accidents. I mean, if you have a gun in your home, every single person living in that home should be aware that you have that firearm. You should train your child. Children are bright. Don't think that you're going to hide something and the child is not going to find it. That is, the better you hide it, the more they're going to dig to find it. That's the nature of being a child.
Absolutely.
So you train your child that without supervision, that there's 4 instructions. Stop. Don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. It's very simple. Stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. And I have a gun safety rule section on my blog, Gun Banger, and it lists basic rules and suggestions for making the home a safe environment for both children and your firearms. And I think it's important for any gun owner, just as you and I regularly practice with our firearm, you need to make aware. I have an 8-year-old granddaughter who regularly visits, and she needs to understand that there are places that she is not allowed to go, and there are things that she cannot see. And the first time she saw me holding a firearm in a picture, she says, "Nana touched a gun." And I explained to her that I was able to, because I practice with it, and I explain what home defense is about. And unfortunately, I hate to have to do that and explain that there are dangers out there, but that's the world in which we live. And to not do that, I feel I would be a very irresponsible person and grandmother.
Yeah, I agree. I think that kids need to know that, guns are used for good things and bad things, and it depends on who's holding the gun. Now, Janet, do there exist, so I know that there are gun safes, right? So there are gun safes that have a combination on them. Are there other ways to secure a pistol for home defense that are more easily accessible to the proper people while still keeping the guns away from children?
Well, that's a great question, and you need to really evaluate the personality of the child. There are children who are more inquisitive, and at a certain age, a child, I think it's like age 7 or something, 7 or 8, they really can't decipher a play gun to a real gun. And those are all considerations that you need to take because each home is different, and each situation and each child and each personality. But basically, if you're a gun owner and you have firearms in your home and you have children in those, in that home, they must be taught the proper use and the treatment of firearms before the weapon is even allowed in the home. Once it's allowed in the home, there are absolutely a number of different safes, from fingerprint, where you just put your finger on top of it, it'll only open for you. Obviously, you can keep the ammo in a separate location. There are underbed gun safes. There are just so many things available that there should be no accidents happening if you treat the firearm the way you should before it enters the home, and you properly train every single person, every member who is living in that home. You train them to understand what the weapon is used for and who is allowed to handle it in a situation. And you really, like I said, the statistics don't lie, and they're quite low if you consider that 300 million homes have firearms. Like you said, the statistics of children dying in car accidents or bicycle accidents on the playground are greater than firearm accidents in the home. So it's just a media blitz of trying to ban firearms and those of us who are responsible from owning them.
Yeah, there's definitely an agenda there. So while we're talking about safety in the home with respect to firearms, what's the best way to ensure that I don't accidentally shoot a family member thinking that they're an intruder? Like in a situation, for example, when somebody comes home late and they're making noise, someone's coming in past their curfew, teenagers, and they come home at an unexpected time. What's a good way to make sure? Because occasionally you hear about, son comes home late, dad thinks son's an intruder, and doesn't really identify his target very well, and shoots somebody he doesn't intend. You very rarely hear about that. However, no one wants to accidentally shoot a family member who's stumbling in drunk after curfew. What are some things that we might do to avoid that situation?
Well, that's a great question, and again, I don't know what the statistics are for that happening, but even one accident like that is too many.
Exactly.
Gun safety education must become mandatory for all gun owners and their families. The decision to put a firearm in your hand and bring that firearm into your home is a very important decision, and it needs to be discussed with every person who is coming in. So that if your teenage son decides to come in past curfew, or if your military daughter is away and decides to come in and surprise you, she already knows that you live in that home possibly as a single female, or even if you're, a husband and wife, she knows there's a firearm in that home. So prior to surprising you, she makes known who it is surprising, so these things don't happen. I would like to just state that every gun owner should memorize the basic. There's 4 very simple gun safety rules. Number 1 is you treat all firearms as if they were loaded. Number 2, you point the firearm in a safe direction at all times. Number 3, you keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. And number 4, which we touched on before, is know your target and what's beyond it. So bottom line, the person coming in should know you have a firearm, period.
Yeah, maybe send a text message first.
That's right.
All right. In a home defense situation, should I, so there's an intruder in my house, should I fire a warning shot first just to let him know I'm serious?
No, ammo is way too expensive for a warning shot, buddy.
Oh my goodness.
Well, here's the thing. A drawn gun may cause the bad guy or bad guys to flee the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And what you need to realize that is a warning shot could open the door to a charge of reckless discharging a firearm.
Oh.
And a warning shot could also take out the wrong person.
Yes.
You could also face prosecution for discharging a firearm where you are prohibited from doing so. And finally, what I think is really important is a warning shot indicates to a jury that Sarah wasn't really in a life-threatening situation. If you or your loved ones or other innocents were in such grave danger, why didn't you just shoot the bad guy or bad guys?
Those are really...
Right, back to basic safety rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. And that means at the offender, not up at the ceiling.
Right, right. And I hear people talking about things like warning shots, and I just think, oh, that's, you know, because you're not intending to kill the person who's in your house and willing to do you harm, because, you know, most bad guys, when confronted with a determined-looking homeowner with a gun in their hand, they'll leave, which is what we really want them to do. We want them out of the house. But if they start coming toward us, we want to stop them. We don't necessarily want to kill them, but we want to stop them. And so I don't think a warning shot is really going to do anything but give you really bad ringing in the ears, personally. You know, I mean, I would hope that I never had to use a weapon in defense, either in the home or out of the home. I would hope that, you know, the bad guy would see the weapon and say, this is just way too much trouble, and leave. What I want them to do is I want them to leave. But if they're not going to leave, then, you know, measures must be taken. So thank you for saying that. And, you know, another thing is a lot of people, they're really squeamish about shooting another person, understandably, you know, because most of us are compassionate human beings who don't want to hurt other people. So if there's an intruder in my house and I feel like my life is being threatened, should I shoot to wound them or shoot to kill them?
Well, Sarah, like you, I pray I never have to use my firearm. I enjoy going to the range. It's a fun sport. However, I also need to defend myself if the situation comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question, some gun owners have decided in advance that no situation ever justifies using deadly force against another human being, and I respect that. Others have decided that the use of deadly force is justified only in wartime and against an enemy soldier, and that's fine. And probably the majority have decided that the use of deadly force is justified to save their life or the lives of their family, friends, or innocent persons.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your position, and this is very important, whatever your position, know it in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your position. You don't want to stand there in a high-stress situation and be calculating in your mind, what I don't want to hurt them, I don't want to kill someone. You need to know in your head in advance what your position is, practice that, and in the situation it needs to be go time and a no-brainer, because so much is going to be happening with your body and in your mind that you need to be on basically autopilot to defend yourself, because I think, you know, most attacks happen, someone can travel 20 steps in 1.5 seconds. Well, that's not a whole lot of time.
That's a really good point that you bring up, one of mindset. You know, I know a lot of people, my own father, he said to me once that he could not shoot anybody. And, you know, he's former Army, he was in Vietnam, he served in Vietnam. You know, his attitude is that he would never, and he doesn't even own a gun. I didn't grow up with guns. His attitude is he would never shoot anybody. But I think you bring up a really good point that everybody has to know what where their personal line is, right? And what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do in defense of self or others. So some people feel like they will defend strangers. Some people feel like they will not defend strangers. Some people have different mindset for an attack in your home where your family is present versus confrontation, deadly force situation outside of the home. So I think that's a really good point that you bring up, that everybody has to figure out what they're comfortable with, and because these situations develop so rapidly. I don't think anybody realizes, like you said, that a guy with a knife can basically be on you from 20 feet away in less than 5 seconds, which gives you very little time to mentally evaluate what's going on. You have to react. So I think that's a good point that you bring up.
Absolutely, and you touched on something that's very important. As far as strangers, that's probably, I think, one of the most critical moments. When you're in your home, you're defending yourself, you make up your mind, this is what I'm going to do. My theory is anyone who's in my home that shouldn't be there isn't there to negotiate with me on what they can take. My mindset is they are there to harm me or harm my husband, or possibly both, because they're probably on drugs.
Right.
They're looking to, I don't know who they are. They shouldn't be in my home, and I have to take action, period. Now, outside, let's say that, here's the scenario. You see this woman, and she is being smacked by a guy, and he's trying to pull her purse away, and you see that he has a knife in his hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your mind automatically goes to, this guy is trying to steal her purse.
Right.
Well, let's say that guy happened to be standing outside the store holding his wife's purse, and the woman is the one who actually stole the purse from him, and now he's got a knife that he had trying to get his wife's purse back.
Right.
Obviously, if you use deadly force on this guy, he's actually the victim. So those are the situations that really take discernment, and you really better know who the victim is and who the offender is. Because automatically, were you thinking that the woman was beating him to get her purse back?
Well, no, and you bring up a good point. When you're talking about defending a stranger outside your home, and this is kind of off topic because we were talking about self-defense firearms for women, but everybody, like you said, needs to know what they're comfortable with. Personally, I won't defend a stranger. It's too dangerous because I don't know what's going on, and it's none of my business. I'm responsible for me and for the people that I love, and they're responsible for themselves. And that may sound cold, but it's none of my what happens to them in terms of me stepping in to defend somebody. That's not something I'm comfortable with for some of the reasons that you just mentioned. I would never get involved in something like that. I would observe and call the police. That's what I would do. It is not my job to defend other people.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So let's talk about using a weapon. I know you're not a lawyer, so we'll put that caveat out there. But in the event that somebody does have to use a self-defense weapon in the home, what's kind of the common sense thing that you should do afterward? Because you hear all these crazy things, like if you have to shoot them outside, drag them back in, which to me is just stupid. I mean, for one thing, you should never shoot somebody outside your home because they're not a threat to you, obviously. But you hear all kinds of nonsense like that. So if I do have to use my weapon, and again, we're talking in my home, what are some things that I should do afterward?
Okay, well, just to clear up here, I could be walking to my front door and be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And have to shoot that person on in my driveway or whatever. I'm not inside of my home.
Yeah.
But obviously, we can be in situations where it's our life and we have to shoot and we're not inside our confined home space. But let's talk about inside the home. the very first thing you do is you call 911, and you make the call. This is very important. You make the call as short as possible. 911 operators are trained to keep you on the line, but you need to know that anything, I'm not an attorney, but I do know that anything that you say to 911 can and will be used you in a court of law. So you call 911 and you simply tell them that your life or your household's life was in danger and that someone's been shot, period. You do not discuss the 911 call with the police. You simply tell them that your life or your household was in danger and that you will answer all of their questions after you speak to your attorney, period.
That is such good advice. That is such good advice. I think a lot of times the things that people say, not what they do, but what they say, can really harm them and harm their claim of self-defense, even when the self-defense is legitimate. So I'm a big fan of, I'm really upset. I need to talk to an attorney. And the fact that you're asking for an attorney is actually not admissible as evidence of guilt. And I think sometimes people are afraid to ask for an attorney or say that they need to speak to an attorney because they're afraid that that will make them look guilty. When in fact that's just a normal common sense thing that people should be thinking about if they're ever in such a horrible situation. I think your advice is very good to just not say anything. I mean, I would be inclined to call 911 and tell them send an ambulance, and maybe even attempt to save the guy's life if I could, even though maybe that's contrary to what some people, that would be my instinct, because I would feel horrible having to shoot somebody, but necessity. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, absolutely, and you don't have to. You really said it, right. You think that, oh, well, I need to talk to an attorney. I'm guilty. No, we're not lawyers. We don't know the laws. We don't. We're at such a heightened state at that moment. And you, I'm sure, have seen something happen where other people have seen the same event unfold, and there's different sort of stories that come out.
Yeah.
And until you can really absorb what just happened, you need to zip it, lock it, and put it in your pocket.
Yep. Yeah. I so agree with what you just said. You need somebody, when something horrible like that happens to you, you really need an advocate of your own, and that's why it's really good to call an attorney. And another thing that I would advise is find an attorney in advance. Okay, I know everybody hates attorneys, blah blah blah, but there are actually good attorneys out there who are pro-gun and who do specialize in criminal defense. I know that you think, well, why do I need a criminal defense attorney because I'm not a criminal? But people should be aware that, depending on where you live, there are certain municipalities where they want to discourage people from defending themselves, and they will prosecute you even if you're in the right. So it's good to not give them any information and tell them to speak with your attorney, and you absolutely have the right to do that. You do not have to talk to the police, and the fact that you do not talk to them and you ask an attorney, you want to ask an attorney before you speak to them, or you want to not talk to the police at all and tell them to contact your attorney instead, none of those things is evidence of guilt, and it cannot be brought in a court of law as evidence of guilt.
That's right. It's your right to have an attorney, so use it.
Absolutely, and I think people need to be more aware of their rights vis-a-vis the police these days, especially because it seems like, I support our police and firemen and military, but I think a lot of them are, the police especially, are overstepping their bounds very often, and so citizens need to know where the line is and make sure that the police don't cross it. So next question, you hear all this nonsense about, if you have to shoot somebody and they're outside, drag them back in. Well, what do you think about that? I think it's nonsense.
Well, it's kind of funny. Obviously, depending on your state, as I said before, you need to know the laws. But you can use lethal force to protect yourself if you feel your life is in danger. Or you can use lethal force to protect someone else's life. Obviously, like you and I said, we'll protect someone we know, but not necessarily a stranger.
Right.
You cannot use lethal force to protect property. So that means you can't shoot someone if they're not threatening your life. It has to be an imminent danger. So shooting someone in the back is definitely a no-no, unless they're attacking you and I'm protecting you. So if you shoot someone outside of your home because your life's in danger, you shouldn't move them because you have a legal right to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you move them, I mean, how are you going to clean up the drag mark? Let's be real.
Yeah.
You're 5'1", I'm 5'4". We're going to drag a 250 dude into, from the driveway into our home, and then somehow clean up, and then say, no, this is where I shot him, but somehow the remains of, have somehow gotten into that tree over there. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and that's like a total fallacy. That's, drag them into your home. Really? Come on. Just call 911 and then tell the police you want an attorney.
Yeah, totally. I mean, every time I hear that, I just roll my eyes and go, that's just the biggest bunch of nonsense I ever heard. Well, Janet, we're almost at the end of our interview. Do you have any closing thoughts that maybe we haven't covered about home defense weapons for women that you'd like to share?
Well, I think we did a great job at answering some basic questions for people, maybe some women who would like to consider it. Basically, choosing a home defense gun is a serious consideration, and it's an important choice to make, and carefully evaluating the factors that you and I have covered, I think, ensures that you'll make the right choice if you're ever faced with defending your home and your loved ones. So, practice, know your weapon. I always liken it to when a gal says, oh, guns scare me. I say, well, when you first got behind the wheel of a vehicle, were you afraid? When you had to merge onto the highway? And, of course, I think it's different for women. Men kind of get behind the wheel of a car as a 15-year-old and they can't wait. And women, we're just a little bit more cautious. So the same thing, we now get in a car and we don't even have a second thought. We turn it on, we go on our way. There's no, nerves is not even part of it. The same thing with a firearm. You should become so familiar with it that it just becomes a part of, it's basically just a part of who you are. And it becomes, rather than considering it a weapon, it's a tool. It's an additional tool that you have in your garage. It's an additional tool you have in your home. And following the guidelines that you and I have outlined about, safety and reliability and shootability and fit and practice and knowing gun rules, attending classes that will educate you and your family, I think that is a really good baseline start for any lady or gentleman who is looking to defend and have the right to defend their home.
Well, good. Thank you for that. And again, thank you, Janet Swahn from bestgunbroker.com. And you also have a blog where you blog. Will you tell us the URL for that too, so readers can go there and check out what you have to say?
Sure. The blog is gunbanger.com, and it is really just kind of a fun. It covers everything from politics to funny gun jokes and what's going on basically across the United States today with ridiculous gun debates that have no need even being on TV or in the media at all. So it's just a fun way to kind of get away. You do get some great firearm tips, but it's mostly for fun and education. So hopefully you can check it out and put your feedback in there, because we always like to hear from like-minded people.
I will go check that out. And so once again, you can, the viewers can find you at bestgunbroker.com or gunbanger.com, and they can find me at readyfortheworst.com. And this is Sarah Stafford, and I'm concluding another Google Hangout, and hope you've all enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Ciao.
Ciao.